using it for research and development. So how do we break this vicious cycle or low level of equilibrium when it comes to innovation?
So I think a lot of this has got to do with our mindset about this whole thing. How deep-rooted it is, I'll give you a semblance of it. You see, today when we talk about Swadeshi, we think of charkha, we think of khadi and so on. But let me tell you a little bit about the history of this. The Swadeshi movement, by the way, started right in this city. It related to the 1905 Bongo Bongo partition attempt that had happened in 1905. When the Swadeshi movement started, interestingly, it was entirely a modernist movement. It was not about trying to go back to traditionalist modes of production, but about getting Indian entrepreneurs to produce things in the cutting edge things of that time. So, there was a large number of Bengali entrepreneurs. Now people forget that there's such a thing as a Bengali entrepreneur. But in fact, Bengal has a very ancient tradition of entrepreneurship. And one of the golden eras of this in modern times was in fact this period starting from 1905, when a large number of entrepreneurs, some of them are non-Bengali also but based here, who began to invest into cutting edge technologies of that time. And that led to, by the way, Calcutta Chemicals, Bengal Chemicals. I mentioned my own great-grandfather, Mohini Mohan Chakraborty, has set up Mohini Mills, which became at one point one of the largest cotton textile mills in Asia, if not in the world. All of them were inspired by Swadeshi movement. Yeah. And unfortunately, it was politically convenient or what, I don't know. It got hijacked, I would argue, into this largely Luddite pathway in which we began to think about Swadeshi as something going back rather than going forward. And this is the context in which Rabindranath Tagore made that comment, because he was, as people do not know, why was it that Robi Thakur was against the Gandhian version of Swadeshi? It was related to that period. So it is very important to understand this. So I am actually making a similar point a century later, that Indian business has got to be, yes, there are unfair competitions from China, but we have to live in this world. We cannot wish them away. Even many of you will not be able to do business unless you import parts and inputs from China. So we have to compete with them. Okay, we can provide some temporary sort of frictions in the system, but we have to deal with them, which requires us to be and push hard to the cutting edge. We cannot always be defended by those narrow domestic walls which Robi Thakur warned us about. We have to go out there and compete. And that requires R&D. So let me be quite brutal about this. I go to I talk almost every few days in some industry body event. And very often I ask leading titans of industry who give us 10 on 10 every year in our budget, okay, can you tell me what is your R&D department doing? I want to visit it and see your R&D department. After some shuffling of feet and some conversation, they will try and divert my conversation into some CSR activity that his wife is doing in some remote village with weavers. You do it yourself. This experiment you do, all of you can do yourselves. R&D, you bring up R&D with a large company which should have more than enough resources to do R&D, and they will divert the conversation to some remote village where they do something. Now I have nothing against helping weavers in remote village, but it is not a substitute for doing cutting edge R&D. We have to do R&D. And yes, the government also has some role to play in this. But let me tell you, worldwide, governments do R&D, but the real cutting edge of R&D is always comes from the private sector, not from the public sector. There are some areas where the public sector can do, and Indian government is doing. You know, there are areas like UPI, In fact, one of the ironies is, with all its inefficiencies, the Indian state is actually doing some cutting edge stuff like UPI, maybe ONDC, maybe some of the space stuff. Where is the private sector's equivalents? Now let's go to the US. Today we have a situation where astronauts are stuck in space. And it's a private sector that has to go out there and rescue them.
Yeah.
Of course, admittedly, the private sector also got them stuck there. That's a different matter. But see the ambition. They sent them there, took the risk, they got stuck there. Another private sector is going to get them and rescue them.
Yeah.
So this is the level of ambition of just one businessman, Elon Musk. Boring company, X, space, and doing all of this while he is also completely overturning the world of EVs.
Yeah.
There are similar people. He's not even the only one, and you have had Zuckerberg or name it. And this creative destruction process, I mean, there are many things wrong going on in America, but it's still, you have to agree, since this is the Indo-American chamber after all, that there is a lot of other things going wrong with America of today. But it still has this spark in there of these extraordinary risk-taking things. And it shows through a very simple measure of this, let me tell you. Go and look at the top 10 companies by market cap in India, China, US. 20 years back and today, and compare them, and you'll see something very stunning. If you look at the top 10 companies by market cap in the US, 9 out of 10 are different between 20 years back and today. Only one, Microsoft, is common. Whether it is Alphabet or Meta, all these companies were relatively small companies or brand new companies 20 years ago. Tesla, Nvidia, which is a slightly older company, but was a tiny company till just 2 years ago. I had never even heard of them till 2 years ago. But look at the creative destruction. China. BYD is now one of the largest, if not very soon will be the largest automobiles company in the world. 2 years ago, I had not even heard of it.
Yeah.
It is, as a company, only 13, 14 years old. China's largest software company is not even 10 years old, it's 9 years old. I don't even know exactly how to pronounce its name. Now come and look at the top 10 companies in India. 7 out of 10 are the same from 20 years ago. Even of the other 3, the new ones, are not new companies. They're old companies like LIC that happen to have got listed and have now risen to be in the top 10 companies. They're not new companies. So the creative destruction process is not happening here. So this is something that we need. We need first generation entrepreneurs taking big risks. Or even old companies that are radically rethinking themselves. Yes, I'm sure there are exceptions to this. But I want to see completely new risk-taking happening. When that creative destruction process is happening, that is the spirit of risk-taking. It is the spirit. Columbus may not have been a good guy. Vasco da Gama was not a good guy. Both of them were clearly not good people. But there is no doubt that they were serious risk takers and they represent a certain culture.
I think those are very important points, but as I entered this room, there were a lot of questions that were coming up. So let me try to frame it a little historically. Some may argue that because of the sort of quote-unquote pro-business strategy, so strategy targeted at certain businesses, but really killing competition, which was undertaken in India post-independence, probably led to such a point of this destruction in a non-creative way, which happened to the entrepreneurial spirit, that today you need a high fixed cost to go to a pro-market, competition-friendly and yet innovation-focused economy rather than an imitation-focused economy. So how does one come above those fixed costs as an entrepreneur and motivate themselves to take up these steps of going towards a more innovation-based stance?
So first of all, a lot of it has to be done by, of course, government regulation, which still stymies brand new people entering.
Yes.
So, I mean, I have been talking about great frameworks of reform, the structural reform. But a lot of the reforms we now need to do are not big reforms. They are actually process reforms. These are small reforms. You know, some act where there's rule number 42 subsection D, which gets in the way. And you have to do them one by one. And a very large proportion of them, these small frictions, become overwhelming frictions to a new entrant into the system. Sometimes they, you know, I'll give you one example of them, angel tax. I mean, it's, you know, angel tax, thankfully now buried, was effectively an entrance barrier. But it is quite astounding how few people from industry actually asked me to remove it. There were a few people in the VC industry and a few, but very few people from established industry wanted it removed. It's a fact.
Yeah.
There are now many such changes. I'll give you another example of it. Patenting. Okay. Till just 6 years ago, do you know how many patents India used to do? 6 or 7 years ago, we used to do less than 10,000 patents a year. Okay. The process was complicated. It used to take 5, 6, 7 years to get a patent, by which time whatever technology you were trying to patent had become outdated. In comparison, the US does over 3 lakh patents. And China, but 6 years ago, it was doing already 4 lakh patents. Now, in China's case, there is a big debate about the quality of patents, but even if you ignore that and look at only the good patents they are doing a few lakh good patents also. And in that environment, we were doing just some 10,000 patents a year. So I began looking into this about a couple of years ago, and then we began to clean up the small changes in the system. And let me report to you that in the last financial year, we did 103,000 patents, over a lakh of patents in the last financial year. So a 10 time increase in 6 years. How did we do it? Mostly by doing small changes. These are not grand structural changes. Piece by piece, small changes, process changes. Similar thing I did with ease of exit. So everybody loves ease of entry, but creative destruction also needs ease of exit. And I talked about the insolvency and bankruptcy. That's what bankrupt companies. But in fact, 90% of companies that need to be shut down are not bankrupt companies, but just voluntary shutting down of companies. Many of these in the room will have attempted to shut down a company at some point in time and know what utter pain it is, right? Now, I again looked into this about a year and a half ago when I was still in the finance ministry and discovered the following bizarre thing. That even when a company had to be shut down, everybody agreed that it had to be shut down. There was no cases outstanding, no tax demands, nothing. Even when everybody agrees, it used to take years to shut down a company. And of course, if you haven't shut down a company, you still have to do it, audit, have to do all kinds of things. Till it's shut down, you have to do everything that MCA wants you to do. So why was this taking so long? So I looked into the process. It turns out that for some reason you had to go in sequence and get NOCs from a bunch of people. Now, why did you need to go in sequence to get them? And even after you got all those NOCs, you then had to go to the registrar of companies and ask them to publish your name in the newspaper so you could finally shut it down. And they would take months, if not years, to actually publish it. In fact, as you can imagine, there was a lot of rent seeking in that as well. You had actually had to pay somebody off to shut down to publish the name so that you could shut it down. So, a lot of consultations happened. Now the process has been about, in May last year, a process was created which is completely automated in a website called CPACE. Many of you can now use it, and maybe you haven't even used it, in which you just put in your name and application. It simultaneously sends it to various departments for asking for the NOC. If nobody responds within 21 days, the system generates an NOC. And then it goes to the ROC where it generates a list of companies that need to be put up for an advertisement. So if for some reason ROC does not put up that list for the advertisement, then the ROC has to explain why it did not. As a result of this, what used to take months and years now takes only 90 days. So in the last 6 months, the rate at which a company takes to shut down a company end to end is now 90 days. This is the fastest in the world. In fact, I don't want it to be any faster than this, because I want there to be some lag, because there needs to be some lag for shutting down a company, otherwise there are other problems. But I'm just pointing out to you that going through the painful process of cleaning up the system leads to huge benefits. Now, my latest bugbear is EPFO. Did you know that the EPFO, which has 300 million accounts, do you know what its failure rate is when you try to take out its money? A pensioner trying to take out his money from EPFO has a 44% failure rate. Think about it. So not surprisingly, most people think that EPFO is a tax rather than a saving scheme. I'm trying to fix it, but I'm just telling you the kinds of things you have to get into. Not surprisingly, it does not make me popular. But somebody has to stand up and ask very common sense questions. And I will ask this. But this requires a certain state of mind which society has to have in order to provide support to people like me.
Yes.
And sometimes I will ask those uncomfortable questions of you as well. So for example, let me show you what business councils do. Because as I said, I'm going to ask uncomfortable questions, I'll ask it of everybody. Let me show you what business councils do routinely. Please do not do this, because this is one of the culture problems. Some director general from department of something or the other will come to lecture you. Joint secretary of IT industry or whatever will come here. Okay? Somebody titan of industry will stand up and ask this gentleman, what do you think will happen to artificial intelligence in 20 years? DG IT will stand up and give a 20-minute lecture on what he thinks will happen to artificial intelligence over the next 20 years. Nobody will ask him how he knows so much about artificial intelligence when he was Joint Secretary Fisheries till the previous morning. It is you who ask these questions and enable this horrible culture. We have to stop it. Otherwise, this will go on and on. This Ji Huzuri has to stop. Sorry if I am being a bit passionate about it, but I really think that we need to have a culture change.
I mean, I think your passion is quite pervasive, because we can all feel it, and probably culture change first happens when someone speaks about it like this openly, right? So, since you mentioned artificial change, let me ask you the question you asked, you just mentioned on what do you think will happen to artificial intelligence and going forward, but more so, because I know that you would probably have a pragmatic and yet probably even radical perspective on the regulatory aspect there. Artificial intelligence can be viewed in many ways in real life and its applications. While it has several advantages, obviously in terms of productivity and other things, it is one of those things that needs to be managed with a lot of ethic and also probably with a lot of caution, right? One of my own works actually speaks about cyberbullying, and we realize how things like that have become very, very prevalent in the society we live in. So what do you think about regulation of AI, not just in industry, but also from the perspective of societal use?
So before you accuse me of not having thought about this, please read about, I have written extensively on artificial intelligence and its regulation. And the most important thing about regulating artificial intelligence is that you have to think about it not as a technologist, but as a regulator. There is a difference, and I'll explain why. You see, artificial intelligence is an emergent technology. Even those who are creating this technology do not necessarily understand where it will go. This is the most important thing you need to understand about these kinds of technologies that feed on themselves and evolve on their own. Because even those who do not, even those who are creating these technologies do not know exactly where this will go. Now, this is an important common sense point I'm making. You don't need to be a great technologist to understand this. Those who created social media, you go and look at what they were saying 20 years ago. The point they were making was that, look, we will create social media, everybody can talk to everybody else. So finally, we will have an environment that we will all move to the center and we will not have extreme views because now you can read everybody else's views. Instead, what has happened, the algorithms have created all kinds of echo chambers, right? So the point I'm making is that even those who create these technologies don't necessarily understand what they're doing. And this is specifically true with artificial intelligence because artificial intelligence is capable of creating realities in which we can all get trapped. So therefore, whatever we do to manage artificial intelligence must be agnostic to whether or not we can predict where it is going. Okay? Now it turns out that we actually manage many things where we are agnostic about where it is going. Because there are many other complex systems where we routinely manage them. And I'll give one example. The financial markets, right? There are financial markets regulators around the world, including SEBI in India. SEBI does not have to have a view about what Sensex value is going to be in 10 years' time in order to be able to regulate it today. So we have evolved this system. So what does it demand? The way we regulate these systems, by the way, who evolve with these emergent qualities are called complex adaptive systems. There's a whole mathematics around it, and I am one of the people who works in complexity theory. So in complex systems, there are a few things you need to do. You need to be agnostic to its evolution because it doesn't mean how great the expert is. These are fundamentally non-predictable systems. So therefore, their regulation is agnostic to where it is going. They require the following things. First of all, you need to have manual shutdown systems, i.e. you need to have manual overrides that are built into the system that are agnostic to what your preconceptions are about the riskiness of it. Because I don't know where AI will be. What I think is benign today may not be benign tomorrow because that system may have evolved into something that is non-benign. So I have to have manual overrides. 2, artificial intelligence systems should not be allowed to freely speak to each other across the system. Okay? We need to create walls and partitions. This does mean that we may have to give up this idea of the Internet of everything. Just a month ago, we had a static system, an error in a code in one of Microsoft suppliers' codes. It went wrong, and you saw how a static system could shut down everything from airlines to hospitals to banks, right? Now imagine the same thing with emergent technology. It will cause absolute havoc. Therefore, we need to deliberately create partitions. We need to have shutdowns and audits. After all, SEBI asks every company to explain its audits and explain their accounts, and you have regular audits. We should demand artificial intelligence systems the same. We need to ask them that you have to have basic systems of explainability. Just like every company has to explain its accounts, those who are using artificial intelligence systems need to have regular audits and explain why their system is coming up with certain results, and so on and so forth. There's a whole list of them. You can read this paper, which is on the Prime Minister's Economic Council website, on the complex adaptive system approach to regulating AI. But the reason I'm making these points is that the current way in which we are doing it around the world is exactly opposite to this. In the US, we are basically seeing a laissez-faire system where basically large companies are being allowed to do whatever they want. Sooner or later, either even if they have benign intentions, which is a questionable thing, even if they have benign intentions, these systems will very quickly overwhelm the human capability of understanding what they are doing unless they have pre-built into it shutdowns and authentications, human authentications and or explainability requirements. And we are already reaching the margins of where human beings can control it. I don't think private companies will naturally do it. So I don't think the US system is the right one. But we are also, on the other side, the European system, where they are expecting bureaucrats of the European Commission to be able to create neat grades of what is risky and what is not risky. Ex ante, it is not possible to know what is risky. What you think is not risky may tomorrow become very risky. China is doing the same. It thinks the Chinese state is all powerful and therefore will be able to manage AI. I'm sorry, we have seen another emergent system, which is a virus, how it suddenly spread from Wuhan lab. And the Chinese state, assuming it was not doing this deliberately, it lost control.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is, do not think either large technology companies or large bureaucracy will be able to control this. We have to ex ante embed ways in which we can shut these systems down, or that they will periodically go horribly wrong. And for that, we should make sure not everything is connected to everything else, because otherwise, on the same day that your electricity supply blows up is the same day in which your banks will blow up, your medical systems will blow up, your governance systems will blow up, your messaging system will blow up, everything will blow up. We have to be willing to create partitions in this system. Short-term efficiency, but long-term resilience.
Thank you, sir. I think I find your views on this extremely invigorating, especially because it kind of alludes towards looking at AI as an endogenous condition which can change rather than a given or an exogenous condition, which is what makes regulation so much more pertinent. And I'm so glad that you're speaking about such in-depth points of thinking through regulation of AI. Being cognizant of time, maybe just a quick more question for about 2 minutes, and then we open the floor to the audience. A basic fundamental question, since we spoke about culture, innovation, growth, entrepreneurial spirit, and I am an enthusiast of the education sector. So want to know, I know your views on the tertiary sector very well, and so I would segue from that and ask you, what do you think is the role of a school in India to create the Amrit Kal that we speak about today in policy and practice?
So my views on the tertiary sector are a little more evolved. So let me lay them out and then I'll come to your question. Some of you may already be aware of this. I think that in the age of YouTube and ChatGPT, it makes no sense for most subjects, there are some subjects exception, for most subjects to be teaching them in the way we have been teaching higher education all these years, is through repetitive lectures and Q&A.
Yeah.
Why do so many millions of students have to go and listen to some lecture in some classroom when they can sit in their home and listen to the best person on that subject on YouTube, and that get all their answers answered by ChatGPT? It's a complete waste of time. Now I understand there are areas where you can't. Now I can't ask, the medical sector, for example, they need to be able to know how to cut a cadaver and learn how to do surgery. That can't be learned on YouTube. Yeah. There are, maybe the chemists do need a few labs to pour acids into something else. I understand that. But I don't see why an economist, not a very high skill job, needs to not be able to learn most of this stuff on YouTube. If you have great lecturers, let those people give those lectures. Let them, and in fact, far better than a lecture, you can do all the a far better, you can do animation, data, all of that once very well and push it out. And then this allows us to do something very important, which effectively I think for most subjects, not all, for most subjects, we can effectively make tertiary education effectively free. Now, what do the universities then do? I think universities still have a role, but to do something totally different. One, research. This is particularly true of Indian universities, where we expend all our energy doing lecturing, whereas in fact, since I criticize private sector not pushing the boundaries of knowledge, well, our universities also don't push our boundaries of knowledge. We can then get our best minds to push the boundaries of knowledge rather than do repetitive lectures. And we can focus on testing. You learn the knowledge wherever you want. I will do a system of examinations to understand how much the student have learned. I think this will resolve very big problems. For example, the same campus can now be used for a radically more students to throughput, because yes, you still need to bring in students from time to time for doing practicals, to doing projects, to network. But then you see the same campus does not have to be used for 4 years. The same campus can be used for a few months for each batch, and then many more batches can be throughputed. So instead of spending hundreds of acres on creating one batch so that a few hundred students can go through IIT, the same campus can be now pumped through students. And most of the education they are doing otherwise, which allows them to do one more thing, which is to actually do apprenticeships, which is actually far more useful for knowledge than any amount of classrooms will be. So combine apprenticeships with mostly online education and some amount of classroom projects, etc., and leverage the whole system to throughput higher education in a bulk way, in ways that could not have been done in an earlier era. We are simply not doing enough of this yet. And this is particularly good for India because we then don't have to spend the next 30 years trying to build new universities. We can use the existing universities and pump more people through, because remember what happens at the end of that process. We will have gone through in 25, 30 years through our demographic hump, and we will end up like Korea and Japan, even now increasingly China, with university campuses but no students. We too will at some point age. I can 100% sure this room itself will not have replaced itself. You do not have enough kids even in this room to have replaced yourselves. So there will be a time when the number of young will shrink suddenly, and we will have all this infrastructure for no need. So therefore, I don't think we have the time to build new infrastructure. A few more may be needed, but actually in the next 24 years we need to max out the stuff we have, and we now can leverage the IT systems and to be able to throughput more people. There's one more reason we need to do this. No university's curriculums can keep up with the new technologies as they hit us. And the current system requires, he will do PhD, postdoc, and then finally begin teaching. By that point, and then become the senior professor, etc. in their 50s. By the time the people who are the senior most in the system are the most outdated people to be setting the curriculum. So this has to be done in an ongoing way. Cannot be done in the traditional way. This updating has to be done using IT, because at every point in time, the cutting edge of the system will be very, very few people. They cannot go from college to college doing lectures. The only way they can do this, give one great lecture, put it on YouTube. Yeah? So that is the only way I think tertiary education can be. As far as primary education, I think you will still need to do the handheld way, even if you can leverage it with IT. But I do think, but I am not, unlike many other people, a big fan of small classrooms. I went to St. Xavier's School, which had good 40, 45 students in a class. It meant that for most of the time, the teachers did not interfere with my education. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, so many thoughts that crossed my mind. I think there was a lot of semblance with what you were speaking in terms of cultural change with Rabindranath Thakur's views. And right now when you speak about tertiary education, because I'm primarily an also public sector researcher, what I find is that there's a little bit of reflection in what you say with what used to happen in our erstwhile universities such as Nalanda. If you really see what was happening there, some of the research shows that there would be sessions and lectures that were happening today in an online space, which you say, but where students could opt into learning different things rather than being made to sit in a classroom and be taught top down. So there's some merit to that argument in thinking through the creative destruction, as you mentioned earlier, for even the education sector.
But when you talk about creative destruction in the context of Nalanda, do remember, the creative bit we don't know, the destruction did happen.
Yeah.
And in that context, let me also say, slightly out of context to this conversation, that every library needs an army. Any library without an army is doomed to be burnt. This is another aspect of culture that we also should remember.
I don't think I can add more words after that quote. It was quite deep and wise and also rhetoric and some sort of ironic in a way. I would leave the floor open to audience now, and any questions, please.